There are few objects as closely linked to school discipline as the wooden paddle. For generations of students, seeing that long, flat board hanging on a classroom wall was enough to make their stomachs twist in fear. A single word from the teacher, "bend over," could mean a punishment that some remembered for the rest of their lives. Unlike a quick slap with a hand, paddle spanking created a loud crack that echoed through hallways, announcing to everyone nearby that someone was being punished. But what made this practice so common? And why did so many schools and institutions rely on it to control behavior? What is paddle spanking? Paddle spanking is a form of corporal punishment that involves striking a person's buttocks with a flat wooden paddle. Unlike caning or whipping, which often use thin rods or flexible lashes, the paddle is wide and rigid. The typical paddle looks like an oversized wooden spoon without the bowl, or like a cutting board with a handle. Some paddles are smooth, while others have holes drilled into them to reduce air resistance, making each strike faster and more forceful. In schools, the punishment usually involved the student bending over a desk or chair, while the teacher delivered a set number of swats. In homes, parents sometimes used paddles as well, believing it was an effective way to discipline children. The goal of paddle spanking was to cause pain and shame, with the idea that this would teach respect for authority and discourage bad behavior. Where did paddle spanking come from? The origins of paddle spanking go back centuries, but it became especially popular in the United States during the 19th and 20th centuries. As public education spread across the country, many schools adopted paddling as a standard method of discipline. In some communities, it was seen as a normal part of growing up. Teachers and principals often believed that a firm hand, or in this case, a hard paddle, was necessary to keep order in large classrooms. Paddling wasn't limited to schools. In certain military academies and juvenile detention centers, paddles were also used to maintain discipline among cadets or young offenders. By the mid-1900s, paddling had become so common that it was legal in almost every U.S. state, and some states even had specific laws describing when and how it could be applied. How was paddle spanking carried out? The process of paddling followed a predictable routine. When a student broke a serious rule, like cheating, fighting, or talking back, the teacher or principal would first warn them about the consequences. If the behavior continued, the student would be told to report for punishment. In many schools, the child had to bend over a desk, a chair, or sometimes grasp their own ankles. This position made it difficult to move or shield themselves. The paddler would then stand behind them, holding the paddle with both hands, and deliver a certain number of swats. Some paddles were thick enough to bruise after just a few hits. Others were lighter, but designed to sting sharply. In some regions, parents were required to sign a consent form, allowing schools to use corporal punishment. While most paddlings happened privately in the principal's office, sometimes they were given in front of the class as an extra deterrent. This public humiliation could be as damaging emotionally as the physical pain. How did paddle spanking affect children? Paddle spanking had both immediate and long-term effects. Physically, the strikes could leave red marks, bruises or swelling that lasted for days. Some children reported difficulty sitting down afterward. Emotionally, many felt deep shame, especially when punished in front of their classmates. Over time, repeated paddling could lead to fear, anxiety, and resentment toward teachers and authority figures. Research has shown that corporal punishment, including paddling, is linked to higher levels of aggression in children. Instead of learning self-control, some kids learned that violence was an acceptable way to solve problems. Other studies found connections between frequent paddling and lower academic performance, as students who feared being hit often felt less safe and less able to focus on learning. Why did so many schools and institutions use paddles? There were several reasons why paddling became so widespread. One was tradition. For generations, adults believed that strict discipline was necessary to prepare children for adult life. Another reason was practicality. In crowded schools with limited resources, paddling was seen as a quick way to handle disruptive behavior. Many teachers were not trained in other methods of discipline, so they relied on what they had learned themselves. Some communities also believed that corporal punishment taught respect for rules and built character. Supporters often argued that paddling was more effective than suspension, which removed children from the classroom. They claimed it was fast, predictable, and left no permanent harm. However, critics countered that it created a climate of fear and humiliation rather than real understanding. When did attitudes toward paddle spanking change? Attitudes began to shift in the 1970s and 1980s as researchers published more studies about the negative effects of corporal punishment. Psychological organizations, like the American Academy of Pediatrics, started to recommend non-violent forms of discipline. Legal challenges also played a role. In 1977, the U.S. Supreme Court ruled in the case Ingraham v. Wright that corporal punishment in public schools did not violate the Eighth Amendment's ban on cruel and unusual punishment. However, the case also brought national attention to the practice and inspired some states to reconsider their laws. Over time, many states banned paddling in schools altogether. By the early 21st century, more than 30 states had outlawed corporal punishment in public education, though some still allowed it in private schools. Today, paddling remains legal in parts of the American South and Midwest, but it is much less common than it once was. Is paddle spanking still used today? Although rare, paddle spanking has not disappeared entirely. Some rural school districts in the United States still allow paddling as a form of discipline. In these areas, supporters argue that paddling is part of local culture and helps maintain order. However, critics say it is outdated and harmful. Internationally, most countries have banned corporal punishment in schools. The United Nations has called for all forms of physical punishment to end, citing children's rights and the risk of psychological damage. Even in places where paddling remains legal, surveys show that most parents and educators prefer other methods, such as timeouts, loss of privileges, or restorative practices. As understanding of child development has grown, so has the belief that discipline does not have to rely on fear and pain. What can we learn from paddle spanking? Paddle spanking offers a powerful example of how ideas about punishment change over time. What was once seen as normal and necessary is now viewed by many as excessive and damaging. Learning about the history of paddling can help us think more carefully about how we teach discipline and respect. Instead of relying on pain, modern approaches focus on empathy, communication, and clear expectations. While debates continue in some communities, research strongly suggests that nonviolent discipline is more effective in the long run. Understanding why paddling was so common and why it has largely disappeared helps us build healthier ways to guide children toward better behavior. What do you think about paddle spanking? Share your thoughts in the comments below. If you'd like to learn more about punishment worldwide and throughout the ages, don't forget to like and subscribe for more videos.